So as I start sketch number 2, I'm going to draw a line for my design. I can do this. I can draw a line right on the CO2 cartridge housing. You can do that. Because this is basically telling you what the minimum thickness is around the CO2 cartridge hole. This is that material, the minimum amount. And then I'm going to drop down, and I'm going to replicate kind of that E3 car on the Science of Speed website. I kind of like that design. It's a cool design. And even though this kind of looks like a little bit of a sharp drop, and you might say, well, isn't that going to create a lot of drag, Mr. Bolt? Well, it's going to have more of a bullet shape, as you can see there. So even though it might look not so aerodynamic, it's going to look more aerodynamic when I draw my top view. So we kind of had a little bit of that discussion yesterday. And maybe this time around, rather than going almost to the end, I'm going to fall a little bit short. So I would say a minimum length would probably be about an inch from the end of the block. On your paper, about an inch from the end of the block is roughly what I would consider the minimum length of a car. So don't make it too short. Okay, so if we're going to say this is 210 millimeters, that's about 180. Keep in mind, this is not a scale drawing. This is like 1/4 scale. Okay, so this would be roughly what I would say is the shortest distance for a car body. Now I'm actually going to make my car body kind of like what you see up here. I'm going to kind of shape it very much like my front airfoil. So it might even look like this for right now. Okay, I'm just going to leave it like that. Alright? Now the next thing I'm going to draw are my front and rear airfoil. Okay? So a few things that kids do. I'll give you kind of 2 things that I typically see. Sometimes kids will just draw something as simple as this. Just draw a line and call it over. Some kids might even take this and they might even curve it. Okay? Alright? And if you look at a lot of these cars, they do a little bit of both. Some kids kind of curve it so the wheel can get a little bit closer to the part. Some kids will just make it straight. Okay? So I'm just going to leave it like that for now. In the back, and once again, is that a concave or convex shape? What is that? Concave or convex? Okay, so we know concave is like this. Okay, that's concave. And convex kind of goes outward like this. Okay, so the air is kind of diverting kind of like so. Okay, so you have concave, which kind of bends inward. Convex kind of bends outward. Okay, each one of those can work. It just depends on the shape. Okay, because you can have a very steep or gradual concave or convex shape. Let me jump to the back. And in the back, I'm going to create my rear airfoil, kind of like this. I'm going to just leave it like that. Okay? Then I'm going to draw my wheels, and I kind of draw a half circle here, folks. That's just the way I do it. And this should be about the size of a nickel on your paper. Don't make it too big. Don't make it too small. A little bit too far below the car body right there. So this should that wheel should drop just below the car body. Circles are not easy to draw freehand. I'm sure we all can agree. That's why they make those things called compasses. Okay? And I would like you to put a little center line in the middle of your wheel. Alright? Okay, and here's my front airfoil. There's my center line. So that's a front airfoil or front wing. That's a rear airfoil, car body, wheels. What's missing, folks? Yep. What's missing? What's missing? Yes, thank you. So because we know that the wheel is in front of the car body, we're going to make that hidden. So what goes here? Side pod. Okay? And I've seen a lot of different ideas. I've seen kids do things like this. I've seen kids do things like my first drawing where it's just a rectangular shape. And I've seen kids do things kind of like that. I've seen a lot of different stuff. Maybe even a little bit of curve on the bottom even. Okay? Okay? Now maybe with this design, I don't include the spoiler. So that's different from what I did the first time. Okay? So my question to you is this. Is this considered a completed drawing for a front view? Yes or no? Does it have all the required parts? Body, check. Rear airfoil, front airfoil, check. Side pod, check. Front wheel and back wheel, check. Yes. That's done. Required parts are there. Okay, we said the spoiler is optional. Okay? What would be the next step, folks? Projection lines. Now I'm going to do this a little differently, just to prove a point that, yes, I'm going to start drawing the body, but then I'm going to draw my parts, and I'm actually going to draw my wheels last. You can do it any way you want, but I would definitely say first have the body in place, then decide what you want to draw next. But it can be drawn differently than how I showed you yesterday. So once again, we always have a projection line here. Everyone has a projection line on the back of the car body. It's a given. But then right here towards the front where the nose of the car is, which happens to be right where the front of the airfoil is, there's a projection line. Okay, so projection line, projection line. Okay? Now, because I'm doing a car similar to E3, I'm going to add a third projection line here. And this is not something all of you are doing. Some of you might, some of you might not. But the reason I'm putting that projection line there is so that I can draw that conical shape, kind of that bullet shape that I might want to include. So we've had a discussion about this, about how this can come about using a tool that looks like this. This is a handsaw for cutting balsa wood. So this is feasible with a tool like that to make a conical shape around your CO2 cartridge housing. So as we've mentioned before, typically this sketch just follows those dotted lines like so. And then I end here. But I'm going to take it one step further, and here's how I kind of draw my top view. I first kind of draw one side of this kind of conical shape, but I sometimes will do this with my paper. I'll actually take my paper and I'll put it like this. I can see a symmetrical design much easier. That's me. For you, you can do it any way you want. But I can get a nice symmetrical bullet shape when I hold my paper like this, because I can compare both sides a little bit easier. Just the way I roll, the way I work. You can do it any way you like. But keep in mind there's that little dotted line in the middle. And as it says on your paper, that's your symmetry line. So we want to make sure that both sides of that shape, one side is a mirror image of the other. Okay, that's the goal here. Okay, and it is a sketch, so there's a little bit of room for error there, but let's try to make it as symmetrical as possible. So, as I mentioned earlier, you could go one of two ways right now. You could say, okay, body's there. Maybe now, I draw my wheels, or maybe I draw my airfoils and my side pod. So I'm going to actually show you airfoils and side pod as my next move. So I'm going to go ahead and project a line here. And because the front of my car and the front of my airfoil are at the same point, I just need to draw that one. And if you look at that car, E3, this front airfoil would actually look like this on this car. It would come in or out, but they have a little bit of a bend. A little bit of a bend on their airfoil. Whereas if you look at my first design, it just looks rectangular, which is totally normal and fine. Because even though an airfoil looks like this from a front view, if you look at it from above, it's a rectangular shape. That's what it would look like, flat and two-dimensional. But with this design, there's a bit of a curve on that front airfoil, so I'm going to kind of curve it in on my front view. Excuse me, on my top view. Okay, once again, I might rotate my paper. Gives me a little bit better view of symmetry. Okay. And now I'm going to go ahead and draw my rear airfoil or side pod, take your pick. Now if you have a design like mine, and I do these sometimes for a reason, folks, just to make sure we're all on the same page. How many of you have an airfoil that goes, or a side pod that goes just over your wheel? Does anyone have something like that? Okay. So once again, I'm doing this for two reasons. A, because it might be something I want to do, but B, if you're doing it, you need to kind of know eventually how the wheel's going to look. So just keep this in mind. We'll get back to this actually when we draw the wheel, what this is going to look like. And I know I discussed it yesterday, but I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. Some kids, once again, they'll just keep this rectangular. That's fine. Some kids will flare it, like round it out. I've even seen some kids do this. They kind of make a little bit more of an angular, like a line and a line. I've seen rear airfoils kind of look like that as well. Okay? And once again, maybe I draw a little projection line here so I kind of know where that angle is. Okay? And last but not least, I'm going to draw my side pod. Okay, so projection lines. Projection lines. I need to make that a little bit more vertical. There we go. Okay. Once again, I'm basically putting projection lines off of my limits, the furthest point to the left to the furthest point to the right of whatever the part is. And same thing with that E3 car. You know, you could do something like this, but if you look at that side pod, there's flares in a little bit, and you can't come in too sharp because the specs will prevent you from doing something, for example, like this. You can't make a side pod like that thin, folks. Okay, that part, remember, it's a separate part. It's a separate piece of wood. And if I were to make this cut really, 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 really thin right here, then come out, what's going to happen to that? What's going to happen, Charlie? It's going to break. It's going to snap. It's not going to survive. So I give you these limits so that parts have some strength and some stability to them. Okay? We can't make them paper thin, folks. As much as you want to do that to make your car lighter, there's a pretty high probability that the part won't survive. Okay? All right? Yes?
Does it have to be like in the middle spoiler? Does it have to be like side pod?
What about it?
Can you make it like
Two pieces? You could, sure. As long as the overall length is at least, when we get to it, 50, which you'll see on the spec sheet. But yeah, you could have a two-part side pod. There's actually a car in the Signs of Speed where I think a group did that. They kind of created a two-piece. There it is, D4. Okay, so like you, they had to make sure that the overall length, so if I measure from here to here plus here to here, according to my specs, needs to be at least 50 millimeters. So even though you have a two-part, putting those parts, if you were to measure the overall length of each part, it should be at least 50. Okay? But sure, Charlie, good question. You can do that. Okay? All right? Okay, moving on. So now we talk about the wheels. Okay? And as we know with wheels, we have 3 projection lines. One down the center for the center line. And sometimes we find that we have projection lines that are shared with other parts. So you can see here that the edge of my wheel and the edge of my side pod, they're on the same plane there. Same projection line, but my other projection line is not. So this is the point I wanted to make earlier. Because this part goes just over the wheel, when I draw the wheel, we said this becomes a hidden line. That's where the axle hole is. we go out just a little bit on both sides of the car body, just come out just a hair. But when I draw the wheel, even though it looks like it's touching the side pod, it's not. You got to look at my front view to figure that out. But it is going under. It is going under that rear airfoil. So this actually becomes a hidden line here. And remember, the wheels come out just a little bit past the edge of that workspace. Because as we've mentioned before, bless you, the wheels do come out just a little bit. Now remember, the purpose of these airfoils is to divert the air not just over, around the wheels. Okay, get it moving around the wheels. Okay, so you can see I have a combination of object lines and hidden lines. Okay, because that part of that wheel is under my rear airfoil. All right, now when I come to the front, maybe not so much the case. So I got projection lines that are kind of being shared, which kind of means this. This front wheel is going to be a little bit easier, meaning it's going to look like it's touching the parts. It's going to look like it. But if I look at my front view, they're not. Okay? Just happens that this part of my side pod extends up and it's in the same projection line as the edge of my wheel. Okay? So if we take a look at that, is that complete? Do I have all the required pieces and parts? Yeah. Car body, side pods, wheels, rear airfoil, front airfoil, or front wing, and a spoiler is optional. Okay? So that would be a 5-point, that's a 10-point grade right there. Okay? Got all the required parts. Any questions?